Hello and welcome back. In today's short tutorial from the Microlearning Institute, we're going to look at a number of organisational structures, and we're going to look to see what the advantages and disadvantages of different types of organisational structure might be for organisations in terms of supporting them to develop their strategy. There are a number of different organisational structural types. There's what's referred to as a functional structure, a multidivisional structure, a matrix structure, a transnational structure, as well as a project-based structure. Now let's look at these one at a time. Firstly, let's look at a functional structure. So again, you can see here in the functional structure, we typically have the chief executive or the main management team sitting at the top, and into that chief executive or management team reports each functional department. So in our example here, we have the production department, the sales and marketing department, as well as finance, accounting and personnel departments. So this is a very typical structure found in very many organizations. Now there are some advantages of this structure. Firstly, the CEO or the senior management team is very much in touch with all of the detailed activity of the operations. Also, controls are much simpler here in that all of the financial controls operate in the financial department, all of the HR controls operate in the HR department, etc. So it simplifies control mechanisms. There's also a clear definition of responsibility because you work in a particular department in a particular hierarchy. And also we get specialists at senior and middle management level. Now this functional structure also has some inherent disadvantages. One is that the senior management team are maybe too close to the detailed activity of the organisation and consequently may be overburdened with routine day-to-day issues and maybe not have the spare bandwidth to think strategically. Also, there may be a difficulty in coping with diversity because changing this organisational structure is quite complex because again, people are used to working in silos with their specialist skills being deployed. So it's quite difficult to experience change in that context. And again, coordination between functions may also be difficult, particularly if those functions are in physically different locations. So in line with the change management issue, also these structures find it difficult sometimes to adapt to changes in the competitive environment. Next, let's look at a multidivisional structure, and here again in each of the individual divisions we have a functional structure. So here we see divisions A, B, C, D and E, each of whom has a functional structure. However, each of these divisions then report into one centralized head office, and sometimes that head office has outsourced or maybe centralized also some central services such as finance, or potentially HR, or potentially legal. Again, this structure contains some advantages and some disadvantages. Some of the advantages include it's quite a flexible structure. Again, we can implement control by performance. So Division A or Division B can be given some performance targets in terms of profitability or earnings growth or return on capital employed. And again, we can measure the performance of each division with respect to each other, with respect to those metrics. Also, strategy is easier here because each division is in control of its own strategy. And we also have a specialization of competencies here in that each division tends to focus on their own particular market area, so consequently a lot of specialism is included in the resources of each division. Also, training is in a strategic view here, meaning that when we're delivering some training in this context, it's quite strategic because it's focused on the needs of a particular division. As expected, there are also some disadvantages of this structure. One is we've got quite a lot of duplication of central and divisional functions. So every division will have a finance team, every division will have a HR team, every division will have maybe an IT team or a software development team. So we've got quite a lot of duplication, which of course is a significant operating expense. There may also be a lot of fragmentation and non-cooperation. So it's quite difficult for Division B, for example, to leverage some expertise that's available in Division A, because essentially these divisions operate independently without reference to each other. Also, there can be a danger of loss of central control. If the leadership of one or more of the divisions becomes too strong and becomes too successful, they may choose to ignore the central control coming from head office, and that can lead to disharmony across the organisation. Next, let's look at what we call a matrix structure. Okay, and in a matrix structure, again, we have the chief executive, and again, we have an organizational structure of the merchandise director and the MDs of the various trading companies and the finance director and the marketing directors on the board. Now, the matrix structure looks a little bit like this. So here we can see we've got two directions of reporting. Firstly, along the x-axis, we've got groups, divisions who are responsible for products. So here we see, in this example, we have a group of people who are responsible for the development of product groups A, B and C. And that group are responsible for the development of those products right across Europe, the US and the Far East, so in all marketplaces. So we have a group in that sense who has product expertise and product responsibility. Now, on the y-axis here, we see the trading companies. So again, we've got companies set up to distribute all of the products A, B and C in Europe, and we have another company set up to distribute all of the products A, B and C in the US and similarly in the Far East. So we can see we have a matrix type arrangement here where we've got companies set up in each of the geographic locations, Europe, USA and the Far East, to engage with the customers and understand how products A, B and C can be deployed to the customers. And we also then have a separate group who are responsible for the development separately of products A, B and C across all of the geographic locations. So this type of structure is referred to as a matrix structure. And again, it does have some advantages. It means we have an integrated knowledge. So within the organization, we have very detailed knowledge of the products across all of the markets, and we have very detailed knowledge of the markets because we've got business units and trading companies set up in each market. Another advantage here is flexibility, because again we can adapt very quickly to changing user needs because we've got access to that knowledge. And also it allows for dual dimensions. We can focus on products or we can focus on markets. Now, some disadvantages include is the length of time required for decision making. So for example, perhaps a customer in one of the trading entities wants a particular product. It can take quite a lot of time for the product development group to establish if it's worthwhile to develop that product or if that product has a future in other markets. So decision making can be quite slow. And also there's unclear job and task responsibilities because we have a responsibility to the market, whereas we also have a responsibility to the product development coordination. And again, similarly, there's unclear cost and profit responsibilities. So when costs are increasing or when profits are decreasing, it's unclear whether that is because of the activities of the product development group or whether it's because of the activities of the trading companies in the marketplaces. So consequently, this can lead to a high degree of conflict across product development and trading companies. Now we look at some multinational structures, and again here's a 2x2 matrix just to help us to understand some of these. And again, the x-axis here across the top outlines the level of global coordination that we expect, and again it can be anything from low to high. And the y-axis on the left hand side talks to the whole local independence and responsiveness of each of the individual entities. So for example, if we want a very high level of global coordination across our organization, but also we want very high levels of local independence and responsiveness, in that instance we look at developing what are called transnational corporations. Alternatively, and again I won't go into each one in detail, we can look at the development of separate local subsidiaries who are very independent and responsive locally but don't coordinate well globally. We can also look at developing international divisions if we want low levels of global coordination and low local independence and responsiveness. Or alternatively, if we want high global coordination and low independence, we can go for global product divisions as such. Okay, so now finally, let's look at a project-based structure. And very simply, a project-based structure is one where teams are created, they then undertake the work, and then the team is dissolved and perhaps moves on to a different project in a different location. So that's a final organizational type structure that we're going to look at today. Now, the final matrix I'm going to leave you with allows us to compare these different structures in different contexts. And again, we can see that for different challenges, so in terms of control, the most effective organizational structure in terms of control is the functional structure. And of course, the most difficult one to control is the matrix structure with only 1 star. In terms of change and adaptability, matrix structures and transnational and project structures are, by their nature, very, very adaptable, whereas the functional structure is quite difficult to change because, again, of that high level of specialism and that siloed thinking that we spoke about. Similarly, in terms of knowledge, the multidivisional structure is probably the poorest there because, again, we saw that each division has very little knowledge about the products and services supplied by its sister divisions, whereas knowledge really flows very well in the matrix and transnational structures that we spoke about. And finally, in terms of internationalization, again, the functional structure really struggles here to be internationalized, whereas the matrix structure and transnational structure are much more effective for internationalization. Thank you very much for watching this short tutorial from the Microlearning Institute on the topic of organizational structure.